Hello and welcome to the Madhouse podcast. I'm Steve Tierney. It's been a few days since I did my last podcast, and that's because it's been a busy week. Excuse me. We've got obviously the turns are due to run this weekend. Players of the DungeonWorld game will know that deadline is this weekend, so don't forget to get your orders in. And I've had various other things going on. It's just been a kind of a crazy week, but I was thinking about what I would do today, what I would talk about in the podcast, and I'd said previously I might talk about some of the dungeons. And one player has recently asked me, how did DungeonWorld actually come about? What was the first thing that happened? So for those of you who don't do that, I thought I'd talk a little bit about how the game appeared, how we developed it and why we developed it. And it actually dates back long before DungeonWorld was running. I had Madhouse, and the Madhouse company was running lots of play-by-mail games. And back then, most play-by-mail games, there were loads of them at the time, and there were perhaps 300 or 400 companies making games and running games, and it was a big, busy time for the hobby. And we were all posting the turns, so most companies were producing the turns as printouts and posting it through the mail. And it was generally war games. There were some fancy adventure games and some role-playing games, but the most commonly it was like close-ended war games of various kinds, or close-ended strategy games anyway. And we had a number of those. We made some ourselves, we licensed some ourselves, and maybe in another podcast I'll talk about some of the older Madhouse games that are now gone, but used to be quite fun. But we made this game, which was called Retribution, and my colleague Duncan and I, we'd sat down thinking about what sort of game we wanted to make. And we didn't want to make something that was too similar to anything else on the market. And then I had this idea that we could make a game, a kind of a war game, where angels and devils fought one another. And we thought it would be quite good fun to use quotes from the Bible, not for religious purposes, but simply because what great source material to use actual quotes from the Bible all through the game. So as you read your turn results and kind of controlled your angels or devils or whatever were fighting on this battleground, quotes from the Bible would appear. And we did a bit of research into different sorts of devil, with those people who kind of believe there are different sorts of devil and demon, and different sorts of angel. And we did a bunch of research and tried to make it. Took cues from novels that have been written and source material and various different branches of religions, and we made the game, and it was quite good fun. I think we had a reasonable response to it, and there were players coming in, but it certainly didn't set the world on fire. And I think, in hindsight, it was a fun thing to do, but it's not, people just liked when they were playing war games. They either liked proper military war games where you were reenacting something from World War II or some previous war, or fantasy war games where you were controlling orcs. The most popular one we had was a game called Lizards, which we licensed from New Zealand, and that used to be really popular. That was a kind of warring lizard factions in a world where lizards were kind of walk around on two legs and were humanoid in type. And Retribution was going fine. We went along to a play-by-mail convention in Birmingham, and there was a bunch of people there, signed up to it and played it, and some of them played, but all of these games had a similar problem. And the problem was that if you had, say, 16 players, or 10 players, or 20 players, or 30 players, however many you had, it was quite normal for you to lose a third of your players almost straight away, because most games offered a start-up and 2 free turns for free. A lot of people would try it out, immediately find it didn't suit them, or they couldn't understand the rules, or they didn't like the flavour, something about it they didn't like, and they would drop out. So you'd lose a third of your players straight away. Then you'd have 2/3 of players still playing, that's okay. And then immediately some people would start to get the edge in the game. They would start to win or do better. And I think it was a bit of a bad tendency really for players, but I suppose you can't blame them. But people would find, as they started to lose, a whole bunch of them would drop out. Now, don't get me wrong, there were great players who would play to the very end with one unit left and absolutely destroyed position, but it wasn't common, and so you would often find that by about turn 8 or 9 or 10 you were down to a quarter of your original players sometimes, and by the end sometimes down to just 2 or 3 players, and each game would take a while to run and produce and print out. When the game was full with 10, 16, 30, however many players it produced, it would normally make a reasonable return for the company. That once you got to the later turns and you were only running for a few, the returns were much worse. And obviously, companies who want to survive have to be profitable. So a lot of play-by-mail companies in the time struggled with that. And there was a few games that were doing really rather well, and they were games that were open-ended and which you just kind of explored and expanded. And there was a famous game called Quest at the time, which I played for a long time as a player, and it was a fantasy adventure game in a similar vein to DungeonWorld and a number of others. But it had pretty much captured the market for that type of play at the time. But I remember looking at it and thinking, well, There were other games like Legends that did the whole thing much more complex with a war aspect, and there were some other kind of games like that around. But there was nothing really directly that was competing with Quest. And I didn't think it had a lot in it. It was kind of fun, and it let players interact. But there were problems, I thought, with the design. And I remember I was really quite keen on playing at the time, and I remember sending suggestions about what I thought could be improved to the GMs of the time, who were a great company, KJC Games, one of the founders of the hobby, and I take my hat off to the hard work they did. But I think it's fair to say they didn't really respond that well to suggestions, or that's it. They weren't rude or anything, but they wouldn't try and implement them. I think they thought, well, this game is working, we're making good money, what's the problem? And what that does is it makes other people think, well, I could do better than that, actually. And what happened with Retribution, go back to Retribution, is Duncan, who's my colleague, had also very briefly worked for KJC, and it was a bit of a bitter way that finished. So he had, a stake in the game, if you like. We were talking about Retribution, and we argue to this day about which one of us said it first. But one of us, I think it was me, but Duncan thinks it was him. One of us said, we could make a dungeon game out of this, and it was the way we'd made. It was the way we'd made Retribution. It was the way the editors worked and the way the maps worked. And I said, if you replaced those units of angels and units of devils with a single character moving around that map using these orders, that would be like an adventure. And then if you could kind of enter a dungeon, which would be another type of map, and instead of having these kind of, because the angels and the devils in the game gathered resources, I said instead of resources, if they were treasure and gold, you almost got a dungeon adventure game. Well, one of us said this, and the other one very quickly said yeah. But whatever, we were like two minds together on this, and we were talking about it. We spent, 2 or 3 days just plotting it out, and we realised it really wasn't much of a shift to move from the close-ended war game type Retribution, because luckily of the way we've made it almost by accident, into a dungeon game. So we said, well, let's give it a try. There was a big convention coming up. There was, I remember what it was called. It was called something ostentatious, like the Great Play-by-Mail Convention or something. It was in Brighton. And we said, well, I think we can get it ready for then, or a version of it ready. So what we did is we made just one map, one dungeon, which was Central Dungeon. Now, players of the game will know that Central Dungeon still exists. We called it Central because we said it was the map, the dungeon most central to the map of the world in this kingdom that we said it was based in, Bereni. But then, Bereni didn't exist. This game was just one dungeon that was nominally in the middle of a mythical kingdom. And we went along to the Great Play-by-Mail Convention with the ability to sign up about 8 character types and wander around. And what we did is we set our computers and our printers up, and we invited players to play throughout, because the convention ran for 2 or 3 days, and we ran turns every 2 hours for those whole days. So you could have quite a few turns and play. People were there playing other games. They could get a print out of their turn, fill in their orders in between board games and card games they were playing, and bring it back to us, and we would type the orders in. Every couple of hours they get an update. Quite a fun way to play, quick. And by the end of the weekend, it's fair to say people were raving about it. They really liked it. We had expected that it would be okay, but we hadn't anticipated people would like it so much, because, of course, Quest had done the obvious thing that you can do in most fantasy adventure games. And we had played it long enough and been involved long enough in the hobby to know that there were a lot of things they weren't doing. So we'd done those things in our game, but better still, we'd done it all in editors. So the hard code enabled soft code editors, screens that anybody who was running the game could get into. So, for instance, if a player said, I'd like a sword with a name, Demon Slayer, we could, with 2 clicks of a button, create that sword. Much quicker, I think, than Quest or any of the other games at the time could, because of the soft code editors. And so people were suggesting stuff to us, jokingly, through the weekend, and we were just putting it in, and the next turn they would see it appear on their turn, which I think was really great for building a kind of an early customer base, because we took about 50 sign-ups at that first convention, and it just grew so fast. Every time we ran a turn, they were just pouring in. Word of mouth was spreading. We started advertising more and more. They were just pouring in the sign-ups. We couldn't believe it. And so we decided, well, this has got some space to go. Let's grow the game. So we created another couple of dungeons, because we quickly ran out of space. If you put too many people in a dungeon at once and they're all making their way through it, some people are going to straggle, get left behind, and that means the ones at the front pick all the cool stuff up and the ones at the behind feel a bit left out. Still happens a little bit to some extent with some dungeons, but we realised we needed some more dungeons to seed new players into, so they weren't stuck with the dregs of what the other people had left behind. So we created the Dungeons of Drax and Mirrormain, which we said were elsewhere in the Kingdom of Bereni. But again, Kingdom of Bereni didn't exist at this point. It wasn't until about 6 months into running the game that we created the Overland. We made a massive map. It's actually, I think it's 500 by 500 squares, so it's a big old surface map. And that map is the whole of the surface world of the Kingdom of Bereni. And then we placed the entrances to the dungeons on the surface world in roughly where we thought they were. And I engaged the services of an artist to draw the map. I'd sort of sketched out where I thought things were from my mind, and from that early map the artist made it, and he put some things in himself that I told him to. I said, just put some things in if you think of any fun things. Some of them were a bit more twee than I would have done, but I quite liked it. I mean, the guy came back and I said, right, that's the map. I'm going to make the Overland look like that. And I set about doing exactly that, creating the rivers and the roads and the mountains and the hills and the farmland, and all of these things started getting added to the world. And here we are later with literally hundreds of dungeons now and multiple overlands, because when you get to the edge of the overland, that you leave the kingdom. But we've made other kingdoms around the Kingdom of Bereni now, with separate adventure experiences, different flavours, their own dungeons and their own monsters. And the game has just grown and grown and grown for 20 years. But it all grew out of this, originally, what was just a little war game called Retribution that we kind of adapted. And then the genius of it, which I think Duncan really has responsible for, because he thought of this first, definitely, was the flexible editors that mean that two of us could work at once. So Duncan could be hard coding new stuff, and I could be soft coding maps and treasure and monster types and descriptions and all the fun things that make the game come to life. So that is kind of the origin. That's how the game started. A lot happened after that, because we went on to create a history which grew and grew and grew, and we had a writer who used to write the supplements. We've published 5 supplements for the game. May even have another one coming, perhaps early next year. But a lot of things changed as a response to what the players were telling us they wanted, and that's really because I never wanted to make the mistake that had been made when I started and not be responsive enough to what my customers wanted. That's why I think the game continued to grow and ended up dominating, I think, all the games of its type in the world. And I've always been quite excited about that, but it's not something you can be complacent about, because if you make a mistake, you get left behind. A competitor comes and steals the ground from you. Now we have players still playing now, 20 years later, who joined us in that first 6-month period. I don't know if we've still got one who joined us at the Great Play by Mail convention, but we certainly have some that joined us in the very, very early days, and even some players who played with us in games that we ran before DungeonWorld, and that's great, because I've got older as they've got older, and I've seen them get married and have children and all their lives develop, and it's like having this massive extended family, and I think in part that's part of the success of the game. Anyway, that's as much as I'm going to talk about the history of DungeonWorld and Madhouse at the moment. But if you like this video and you think you'd like to hear some more about how it developed and what happened next, because there were some fun things along the way and some challenges, then you let me know in the text and in the chat, and I'll respond and do some more. Until then, see you later.